She asked a man to leave his own pool. What happens next is amazing. It was a sweltering summer afternoon, and the private swimming pool of a large villa overlooking the sea was glistening in the blazing sun. The immense house was the work of a renowned architect, a mixture of modern luxury and comfort. It was here that Vanessa, an ambitious woman in her 30s, had invited a few friends to spend a pleasant time. She had just celebrated a professional success, a long-awaited promotion, and wanted to mark the occasion by throwing an intimate party. Among his guests was his colleague, the insufferable and pretentious Paul, a man in his 40s, whose haughty attitude and detestable manners were well known. Since their meeting at the company, Vanessa found him unbearable. His arrogance manifested itself everywhere, even in trivial situations. His constant need to flaunt his power, status, and influence made others uncomfortable, but no one really dared say anything to him. While the guests were relaxing around the pool, an unexpected event happened. Paul, after having a drink and some nibbles, headed towards the water, not caring who was around or the fact that he wasn't even invited to dive in. He approached the pool, entered it with great flourish, without paying attention to the reserved space or the other people who were already there. But Vanessa, observing the scene from her deck chair, could no longer remain silent. She stood up, her face marked with irritation. It wasn't just a matter of propriety. It was his space, his moment, and Paul, once again, had decided to make it a matter that did not concern him. "Paul, you can't just walk in like that. It's my pool," she said, her tone firm but measured. Paul, with his smug smile, turned towards her.
"Oh, are you kidding?
There are rules for pools now. I didn't see a sign saying only one person could use them. But hey, if that bothers you, I can get out." His dismissive tone echoed his usual contempt. Vanessa felt an unpleasant tingling in her stomach, a tension that slowly spread, invading her entire body. The air seemed thicker suddenly, as if the space around her had shrunk. Her hands clenched, gripping the armrests of the deck chair she was sitting on. The heat of humiliation rose within her, but it wasn't just the embarrassment of being challenged in public that overwhelmed her. No, it was a much more serious feeling, that of having been dispossessed, deprived of a space that she believed to be hers. She had always thought that her status, although still under construction, was sufficient not to suffer such indignities. That evening, the villa, the swimming pool, the luxury around her, all of it belonged to her, or at least, she had convinced herself of it. It was her moment, her victory, the celebration she had given herself after months of hard work and sacrifice. But all that had just been shattered by a man she had never respected and who, with a simple sentence, had just made her understand that he held much more than simple power over her. He owned her reality. She stood up abruptly, her muscles tense, her voice hard but controlled.
"No, Paul, I'm not kidding.
You need to get out of the pool. This house, this pool, is my space, and you don't belong there if you continue like this." The assembly froze. The murmurs, muffled laughter, and whispers that had filled the air moments earlier were silenced in a split second. All eyes turned towards them. Some exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do, while others remained silent, observing the scene with morose curiosity. It was as if everyone was waiting for the outcome of this confrontation. Vanessa knew that if she lost this battle, it would mark a turning point in her professional and personal life. Paul wasn't just being an arrogant colleague, he was a social predator, using his status to crush those who got in his way, and she was going to show him that he couldn't treat her like that. Paul's gaze hardened. His lips twisted into a cold, sarcastic smile, his eyes no longer hiding the glimmer of challenge that was becoming clearer. He sat up slightly, his hands resting on the edge of the pool as he moved away from the water with calculated slowness. He deliberately let the silence drag on, reveling in the awkwardness that had taken over the atmosphere. Without warning, he rose from the pool, water dripping from his sculpted, muscular body, and wrapped himself in a towel with exaggerated nonchalance. His air, full of smugness, seemed to say that he expected everyone to bow to his presence. Then, in a sarcastic burst of voice, he said, "You don't know who you're talking to, do you?" The words floated through the air, sharp as knives. Vanessa felt an icy shiver run down her spine, as if the implications hidden behind this sentence carried a much greater threat than she was aware of. She didn't immediately understand what he meant, but a dull intuition told her that something had just changed. A drop of sweat beaded on her temple, but she tried not to let anything show, to remain calm and sovereign. Paul, seeing her confusion, decided to push the game further. "I think it's time you understood something, Vanessa," he said in a voice heavy with condescension, his eyes piercing those of the young woman. "I am the new owner of this villa, and I intend to keep it." His words hit the air like a detonation, shaking Vanessa to the roots of her certainties. The reality she had built around this evening collapsed in an instant. This villa was no longer his sanctuary. The luxury, the pool, the setting, everything she thought was under her control had just been taken away from her. The guests, too, remained frozen, as if the room had just been transformed into a battlefield where the rules of the game had just changed completely. Vanessa turned pale. A feeling of disbelief, like a punch in the gut, passed through her. "There's no way you're the owner," she stammered, her voice trembling with emotion. She was looking for answers, but everything was confusing in her head. Paul, this detestable colleague, this vain man who never failed to boast of his achievements, owned the villa? How could this be possible? Paul, without even giving him time to digest the truth, allowed himself to smile, a smile that dripped with malice and contempt. "Oh, didn't you notice? This villa, the title deed, it's all mine now," he said with an amused air, almost as if he was enjoying his little feat. "But don't worry, you can stay here, as long as you remember your place." His words, poisoned by arrogance and contempt, hit like a slap. Vanessa felt her blood freeze in her veins. It was more than an affront, more than a simple provocation. It was a deliberate attempt to demean her, to make her understand that she was just a small piece on his chessboard, and that her dreams, her ambitions, were no better than power games in the swimming pool of a rich and foolish man. But what he didn't know was that Vanessa wasn't the type to let herself be crushed, especially not by a man like Paul, no matter how arrogant and dishonest he was. As he reveled in his supposed victory, thinking he had taken control of the situation, Vanessa carefully observed the faces around her. The guests, who stood silently, froze with palpable worry. But there was more. On closer inspection, some of them didn't seem like simple guests. Employees disguised as guests cast nervous glances at Paul, witnesses to his arrogance, but also visibly prisoners of the dynamic imposed by this man. Vanessa captured this detail with razor-sharp precision. These faces, marked by exhaustion and anguish, were those of people who had already seen the hidden side of Paul, who knew his penchant for humiliating and manipulating. However, what they all didn't know was that she was much more prepared than they imagined. Vanessa wasn't just enjoying the social event as a simple hostess. She had anticipated Paul's every move, every low blow, and she had already taken steps to turn the situation to her advantage. She felt an intense calm invade her, like a cold flame burning slowly within her. "I'm glad you informed me, Paul," she said, her words growing heavier, but her tone was relentless, like a sharp sword ready to cut through his pretensions. "Because I am in the process of having the rental contract checked." She paused for a moment, observing the effect of her words on him, before continuing, without losing her serenity.
This villa don't belong to you.
"In fact, you didn't even sign the contract correctly. That's why the bank has already been informed of the situation." Paul's look changed instantly. It was a moment when the facade of confidence and arrogance he had carefully constructed cracked. His eyes, which until then had shone with an almost palpable malevolence, betrayed a sudden unease. His expression closed, and he tried in vain to hide his confusion. He didn't understand what had just happened. Vanessa, with a masterstroke, had just reversed the dynamic of the evening. She was no longer who he thought was dominated by her situation. She was the one with the power now. His smile, although subtle, was imbued with a merciless coldness, as he desperately tried to regain control of the conversation. The silence that settled in the room had serious consequences. Every eye was now on Paul, and the tension in the air was almost palpable. The guests, who until then had observed the scene as anonymous spectators, were now witnesses to an unexpected reversal of the situation. Vanessa, with a simple word, had just shown that she was not easy prey, that her choices were strategic and calculated. Paul's arrogance had been struck to the core, exposed and humiliated. But that was only the beginning. The eyes of the employees disguised as guests began to light up with a new understanding. They were finally witnesses to the behind-the-scenes, the underbelly of this self-proclaimed power. Vanessa was no longer simply a victim or a passive spectator of his manipulations. She had become the force that Paul had not planned to come up against. But the most incredible was yet to come, and Vanessa knew that what happened next was going to be much more explosive than this moment of immediate victory. What she had not yet revealed was that the villa was just one of Paul's many assets under investigation for tax fraud. For months, she had discreetly set up an investigation network and collected evidence without Paul realizing it. She knew that her criminal actions went much further than simple financial embezzlement. The fraud he had orchestrated extended well beyond this villa and affected a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. The following days were marked by a succession of unexpected events. The silence of the evening turned into a media storm. The next morning, lawyers specializing in tax fraud and real estate law were contacted, and the situation took an official turn. Paul quickly found himself in the sights of tax authorities and financial investigators. The link between the villa, tax fraud, and the embezzlement he had organized was brought to light thanks to the information Vanessa had secretly collected. The accumulated evidence was strong enough to initiate a serious investigation, and soon the bank's offices were also involved. The sequence of events was rapid and relentless. Rumors began to circulate in business circles, and soon what was a simple evening among colleagues became the main topic of discussion in professional and media circles. The reputation of Paul, this hated and feared real estate tycoon, was destroyed. Journalists took up the matter, and the revelations about his questionable practices made the front pages of all the newspapers. He was pushed into a spiral of lies and public denunciations, while his former allies moved away from him one after the other. But even more, his career collapsed. Prestigious clients, business partners, financial institutions, everyone who had contributed to his rise turned against him. What had been an empire built on arrogance and the exploitation of others disintegrated like a house of cards. Vanessa, meanwhile, found herself not only as the person who ended his reign, but she became a symbol of resistance, strength and justice in a world where the powerful sometimes seemed above the law. The evening, which had started with humiliation, thus transformed into a historic turning point in Vanessa's life. Once again, she had demonstrated that behind the appearance of a simple guest, there was an implacable force ready to destroy those who believed themselves untouchable. And Paul, now reduced to a broken man, understood too late that true victory lies not in dominating others, but in the ability to maintain one's integrity and challenge those who seek to manipulate the system for their own gain.